Hello, and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones, and same as usual as previous weeks, in the middle of a school day, you might hear some background noise, some children playing, laughing. Part of the deal. So if that distracts you, I apologize in advance. While we're talking about our building, I pastor a church in Indianapolis, Indiana called Northwood Christian Church, where we host multiple schools, as well as we're a church and yoga classes and karate classes and any number of things. You might look us up online to find out more about what we offer in our building. If you're interested in doing that, look us up at www.indyncc.org. That's ndncc.org, and there you'll find a list of our tenants as well as our service times and something of our values and also past sermons and other material, so you can get to learn more about us. Or if you'd like to learn more about us in a more direct way, I'd encourage you to write out to me at my email, which is Heath, that's my name, Heath, at ndncc.org. And it would be great to learn more about our listeners. And while we're talking about our listeners, I encourage you to pause this video or this podcast and like or subscribe to this video if you're listening on YouTube, or if you're listening as a podcast, follow us or subscribe, or however your app frames it, so that you'll be notified when there are new episodes, and we'll also get more traffic steered our way. Before we move on to what we'll be covering in today's episode, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and promote the All Indiana Podcast Network. They produce and distribute our podcast, and for this, we are very grateful. If you like, you might check out other podcasts that they offer made by Hoosiers here in Indiana, All Indiana Podcast Network, hence the name. Anyway, you can find those at www.wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. Now, here in a moment, we'll be going over a passage found in Matthew chapter 16, but first we need to take a break for some ads for our podcast audience, and if this means you, then we'll see you after these ads. And we're back. And as I was saying, our scripture passage is found in Matthew chapter 16, more specifically verses 21 through 28. Matthew 16, 21 through 28, and it reads, "From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, 'God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you.' But he turned and said to Peter, 'Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things.' Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels and the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." There's a lot there, but I want to begin by focusing on the interaction between Peter and Jesus before he turns to his disciples and talks about the need to take up our cross and follow him. This happens just after Jesus has informed his disciples that he is himself going to suffer and be killed even. And you can tell that this prediction more than troubled Peter, more than just a little. So much so that he felt the need to confront Jesus. And he confronts Jesus in a big way, with loud words, emphatically even. "God forbid it. This must never happen to you." There's something about this idea that Peter finds incongruous with his reality, or reality as he knows it. And about reality, so much of reality depends upon our perception of it, or how we experience life. So much of our reality depends on our vantage point. Perhaps the main challenge while grappling with the words of Jesus is trying to get the reality that he describes, the one that he calls the realm of God, to get that to reconcile with the world around us, the world as we know it. But it's hard because Jesus says something like the last will be first and the first will be last. And we say, huh? I mean, Jesus, have you ever seen how a line works? You know, you stand in order, first this person, then the next person. The last cannot be the first. It's logically impossible. You know, our world is full of hierarchies and pecking orders and conceptions of who wins in the end and who loses. So Jesus, from his perception, seems to have it all mixed up. And Peter agrees. Peter pulls him aside to set Jesus straight about his death. He says, no, you cannot die. You are the Messiah, the anointed one who has come to defeat the Roman Empire and to restore Israel's sovereignty, dignity, independence, and to restore our communities that have been broken apart. That's Peter thinking here. To which Jesus replies, get behind me, Satan. You are like a rock that trips people up. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the mindset of the rest of most of humanity. What Jesus said in my paraphrase, and I gotta say, sheesh, those are harsh words. And I should note that the word Satan only means adversary. It's the one that fights you in your pursuit of good things. That's the Satan. It's not the literal devil here we're talking. And Peter is the Satan here, which would cue us in that Jesus is not using it in the literal devil sense. Peter is standing in the way of the realm of God. He is the stumbling block, the obstacle. And Jesus treats him like a road bump on the road to redemption. And this must have come as quite a blow when Peter was called a stumbling block, for in the previous verses, he had just been lauded as the one who got the answer right and was the rock. He had been called the cornerstone of the community that would become the church, just sentences before. And now he is called the adversary, the stumbling block, the Satan. When it was Peter who just named Jesus as the Messiah, seeing him for who he was, if only for a moment. And Jesus said it was God who put that idea into Peter's head, but now Peter does not have in mind the things of God. He is not a building block here, but a tripping block, a stumbling block. And as I was saying, so much of reality has to do with our perception of it, and I think that the obstacle for Peter is his conception of a Messiah from the start, or the one who would liberate his people from Rome's oppressive ways. In Peter's conception, Messiahs don't die. They win. They beat Rome or whoever the enemy is. They take care of business. After all, that's how they came in the past. Peter's head was full of stories of insurrections past, glorious battles as described to him in his traditions and in his stories. I mean, you may have read of the Maccabees rebellion and how they tossed out the Greeks on their heels. That story would be in Peter's mind. Or even further back, didn't King David eventually prevail over his adversaries? And isn't Jesus born into the house of David from that lineage, the most recent in a long line of warrior kings? So true, when David wasn't fighting the Philistines, he was fighting or killing his friends and children. But, eventually violence won out, peace through strength, right? Well, this is Peter's concept of a winner, of a Messiah who wins. And his perception is, in his day, and now I suppose, ubiquitous. His perception is shared by nearly everyone in the Roman Empire. His assumptions about what it takes to beat the Roman empires of the world are assumptions, I think, shared by us all, common to humanity, as I said, even today. The way to life in this paradigm, the one that we hold probably, or the one that we see things from, is that we struggle to persevere over and against our adversaries, our own Satans, if you will. And when we hit hard enough, we can finally enjoy life when we have beaten them. So you fight fire with fire, Roman rule with better weapons or a larger bank account, more resources. You outroam Rome at its own game, or whoever you're up against in whatever country or economy that you reside. So what Peter wants Jesus to do is to amass a following, take up arms, and to tilt the power structures in favor of the people of Israel who have been subjugated and exploited by Rome's rule and its economy. And Peter is ready to throw down. We know this because chapters later, when they do come for Jesus to arrest him, what does Peter do? He draws a sword to fight. He pulls on him. He's packing. And he chops off a man's ear, to which Jesus responds, Peter, put away your sword. Those that live by the sword die by the sword. That's in the same book of Matthew, chapter 26, verse 52. And then Peter, after that, would eventually learn how the Messiah saves. And how does he save? Jesus does not try to out-Rome Rome, build a better army, amass a lot of wealth, or crush his enemies. Instead, he leads with love, peace, and mercy. He leads with his very life and puts his life down for the sake of life and love. And this makes no sense to Peter because this way of thinking is so counter to the dominant assumptions of his culture. And of all of this, biblical scholar David Lose writes, Jesus knows, that by introducing a different logic, one that runs by forgiveness, mercy, and love rather than retribution, violence, and hate, he is challenging the powers that be. Moreover, he knows that the wheel of force and violence will not tolerate his obstruction but run over him. And this, Peter couldn't imagine. Jesus knows that this way to life will be met with obstacles and people who would oppose him, and he was killed for it. So threatened were the powers that be, the powers that used violence and amassed wealth to subjugate the people. It's hard for someone in that context to imagine a different way, and we struggle to imagine it today. We struggle to believe that the words of Jesus are true, that the vision that he cast for the human race could really come alive, this vision he's talking about here. The last will be first and all of that. That the way that leads to life leads through self-denial and then to taking up a cross. Or as the text puts it, verse 25, for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? And this is a strange way to find life from our vantage point, what Jesus said here. And do you believe these words? Do you believe what Jesus said here is wise or foolish? Most of us think that we should fight for our lives. Nature red, tooth and claw. We have a self-preservation streak built in. We think that to save our lives, we must cling to them with all our might, even if we lose our morality in the pursuit. We do not confront the forces of evil in the world. That is, unless we are meeting those forces with overwhelming force ourselves. Otherwise, we just keep our head down. So we try to gain the world. Peter did, we do, by spending our life's energies towards the procurement of what Rome has, or the Romes of our modern time: wealth, stability, land, autonomy. And Rome in its day could not envision a world in which sacrifice, charity, and self-sacrifice could achieve these ends. So it made the world around it in its own image. It dehumanized God's children in the process and tried to create more clones of itself in its provinces and the ruling despots it put in place to keep the power. And for Rome, this was the way towards life. And from Peter's vantage point, it appeared that Rome was right. After all, they had managed to subjugate the known world and all the peoples in it. They amassed the largest armies, the most wealth, the largest buildings, the most opulent lifestyles. For Rome, this was life. Not so, says Jesus. Not if it means you subjugate and crush others to get that. Finding life, he says, is like going to your cross to die. What's killed are the assumptions of the empires and the civilizations of the world who have lived by the sword in pursuit of extravagant material wealth. So finding life for Jesus is like a seed falling to the ground to die, to fight the good fight and to die, but to not die actually, but in falling to find itself. It leaves the comfort of the tree, the nourishment of the sap, the warmth of the sun, in short, all that is familiar, and then it furrows into the soil, and you know how a seed works. A phoenix is reborn. Jesus calls the disciples away from the assumptions of their time, their assumptions about power, strength, what to value, what to pursue, what the good life is, and then he calls them toward the realm of God. And that's what he's calling us to right now. When a disciple has in mind the things of God, the disciple puts their life's energies towards being the servant of all, as we saw Jesus when he walked this earth. The other, our neighbor, is prioritized, care for neighbor and the stranger, prioritized above the needs of the self. And this, says Jesus, brings the realm of God near. A better world for you and for me. When the last are first, and the first are last, it's a better world. But wait, you might be thinking, if I prioritize the needs of others over my own, won't they just take advantage of me? Won't I find myself on the bottom of the pecking order? And this is a fear that many have as they conceptualize what it may be like to be vulnerable in this way that Jesus is describing, to put yourself out there in this way, to give of yourself. And if this is your concern, don't worry. In the realm of God, everyone is seeing it like Jesus sees it. You're part of a community where everyone is striving to meet the needs of all the others. You're not alone in this. Just as you are striving to be a blessing to others, putting the interests and needs of others in that community first, guess what? The others in that community are doing the same for you. That is how church is meant to be when it is healthiest. And what you find in the realm of God are these cycles of reciprocity and endless cycles of love and care that always come back around even to you. To me, as we give, we receive, as others are giving and receiving this community of reciprocal love. And we find ourselves in this process as we come to see who we are in relationship to others. That's what Jesus means when we find ourselves in this way. Rome thought that the way to life was to amass wealth and power, hoard it, and then it would have what it needed. And its ways of violence and greed ate it from the inside. And history has shown this. Jesus teaches us that the way to life is to give what you have, all of you, in the name of love and for the life of the world. Lose your life in the name of love, if that's what's called for. Renounce the brights and shines of this world for a love that lasts. Life-giving community. And that life-giving community that you pursue will come alive around you as you and those you love become more acclimated to these ways of God, but also dying to the old ways and the familiar ways. And that is hard, to die to what is old and familiar, to the world as we've known it. And Peter was afraid to do that, because in the end he seems to have missed out on one detail. He was appalled that Jesus said he would suffer and die, but then he also said that he would live again. In other words, what Peter forgot and what we must not forget is that life does win out in the end. This unlikely, strange way to life may lead to an end of a kind, but love calls life even from the deepest, darkest places. Jesus dies, the body of Christ arises. The church becomes the hands and feet of the movement of God, the realm that Jesus ushered in. You know, they can kill the prophet, but the prophet never really dies. We disciples will surely die someday, but the body of Christ that surrounds us continues to live, and the world is blessed by it. And of course, we hope for a life in what is to come after our death, and that is a great mystery. But I tell you, that last line is no throwaway. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Which is to say, even while we strive to enter the realm of God, we find it growing all around us. Even whilst we strive to have in mind the things of God, the ways of God will manifest all around us as communities built on God's principles come to life and grow. Rome fades to background noise. The dominant voice is sidelined, and those who have been called together learn what real living is. Food is shared, not hoarded. Other people are cared for and not feared. The walls and distance we place between ourselves and those that we fear come down, and the distance spanned as we come to see the image of God in the other is erased. I think that the empires and institutions of any age will always fear the realm of God. History has shown this, and we're seeing it now in real time as people are advocating for meaningful change on our planet. Because the coming of God's realm means the collapse of old ways. The old passes away. And behold, God makes all things new, as the scriptures read, but the old has to die. So I ask myself, what in me needs to die for me to see the breaking in of God's realm into my life? What are the roadblocks, the obstacles, the stumbling blocks, if you will? Well, my greed, for sure. I have it, just like everyone else in the country I live in, it seems. Or my mistrust of others, also an obstacle. Or my inability to see the image of God in myself even, and in others. Of course, there's my fear of ruling power, Roman-like rule. My fear of suffering for the sake of what's right and true. My fear of opening myself up to love and to loving others. And there are many crosses to bear, and I'm trying to describe my own. And my fear of bearing them must die. My fear of leaving the familiar and comfortable, the seeming safety of what I know for the life I hope to discover in the unknown. There are many things in me that need to die before I get there. And it will be disorienting, uncomfortable, walking this strange way to life, skipping over the stumbling blocks or making our way through them. And, this strange way to life, though, seems less strange the longer I walk it. My perspective, and I hope yours, is shifting. And I'm beginning to see that Jesus was, in fact, better at describing what is real, true, and worthy of my time. That in the truest sense, Jesus was better at describing what is real and worthy of our life's pursuit. That this is not foolishness but wisdom. But this is all hard. It's hard to fight against the currents of a dominant culture. So, some days I think to myself, maybe I'll just stick with the world I've long known and continue to play by its rules, however soul-crushing they are sometimes. I'm told that if I play the game long enough, I might rule the world. There's me, being like Peter, the stumbling block. I hope you can see I am my own obstacle between me and the peace of God sometimes. I mean, what good is it if I lose my life? If I put my life's force towards pursuit of the world, as I have been doing for much of my life? Is it true that for me to find a life that matters, I must lose the life I've known? That's what Jesus says here. Is this what it means to leave everything in pursuit of what really matters? I think it does. So I end with a prayer. God, give me the strength to remove my own stumbling blocks in the name of life and love. God, give me the strength to take up my cross and to follow Jesus. God, give me what it takes.